All right, music fans, welcome back. Harmless Dave back again here talking real music in real time for real people just like you and just like me. So Lou Gramm throws down pretty hard on Mick Jones over lost songwriting revenue for the overplayed but epic song, I Want to Know What Love Is. And nobody's going to deny how amazing that song is, especially if you have the full choir back there singing. You know, I've seen a couple of presentations where they bring in this live choir and it's spectacular, right? And there's obviously a choir on the record. It's almost a spiritual song in many ways. And Mick Jones was inspired when he wrote this song, but Lou Gramm is out there telling this story about how they would decide who got what. In other words, they would write down on a piece of paper what they thought the split should be. Like Lou Gramm believed that Mick Jones deserved 65% of the revenue on I Want to Know What Love Is, and he gets 35%. Whereas Mick Jones, on his piece of paper, he wrote down that I deserved 95% of the revenue and Lou gets 5%. And Lou took that as an insult. And I can understand that. He says he was crushed by the credit split on that song. So guess what Lou did? You know, little passive aggressive said, no, why don't you just take all of it? Because that's insulting. You know, I don't know if he said it in those terms, but when you think of it, you get such a lousy proposal like that, and you're thinking, no, you just take all of it. Now, the sad thing is that Mick Jones has taken all of it. That's what's a little bit ironic. Maybe Lou should have took the 5%, right? Look, this band during the 80s, supposedly there was tension that developed after this song because, according to the press that has been out for a number of years, Lou did not like the direction the band was headed. He didn't like these slower power ballads being like a mainstay of what Foreigner was up to. But every band that was in Foreigner's category was doing this and having huge success. So obviously Mick Jones said, look, we had Waiting for a Girl Like You. That hit #2, stayed there for a number of weeks, couldn't get to #1. And then this song comes along and eclipses that one, becomes a worldwide international #1 hit song. And I hate to say it, it's probably the band's signature song. When you think of Foreigner, you should be thinking of like Cold as Ice or Hot Blooded or Urgent or something like that, Jukebox Hero. But I Want to Know What Love is just their biggest song. There's no question about it. So it may not have been just the direction the band was headed in that was ticking off Lou Gramm. It probably was this working relationship and the fact that, you know, hey, I wrote this, this is mine. Now, you know, Faithfully by Journey, for instance, I know that was written by Jonathan Cain. I think start to finish. I don't know if Perry got a writing credit for it. I don't think Neil Sean got a writing credit on it. So if that's the case, you know, does Perry get a portion of that because he sang on it? Well, he should, but if he didn't write it, he isn't going to get any of the publishing. And I think this also applies to Lou Gramm. If he didn't write the song, then he's not entitled to publishing. But these guys had an arrangement. They had this deal where, hey, I'm going to write down on a piece of paper what I think I should get. Now, they should have negotiated. If Lou said 35 and he said 5, Lou should have said, hey, how about 20? And we'll call it a day. We'll call it a deal. But I think Lou was so offended that, you know, Mick thought, hey, 5% is all I get on this. That is pretty offensive. And I can see Lou's point. I mean, look, if you've got a good working relationship with somebody and you're their friend, right? Then you don't have these types of disagreements. You can work things out. And I don't think they ever worked any of these things out. That's why I think, Lou eventually said, okay, this guy's greedy, and I wanted a cut, and he won't even give me the cut that I wanted. I mean, even with Lou's numbers, Mick gets 65%. Probably, based on the song and how it was put together and all the behind the scenes stuff I've seen on this track, this was Mick's baby. I would say 80-20, maybe 75-25, but not 95-5. That's just insulting. This guy, Lou Gramm, was one of the reasons Foreigner was as popular as any of the bands of the time, whether you look at Journey or Survivor or Styx or REO Speedwagon, all the bands in those categories, right? Foreigner was just really an amazing band because of both of these guys. I mean, Lou Gramm, the best, one of the best. You could argue, and I would listen to you and say, I get it. Lou Gramm could be the greatest AOR rock singer of all time. Some people say it's Steve Perry. I like Jimmy Jameson. Some people say it's, pick somebody from the era, Don Barnes from 38 Special, great singer. But Foreigner had something really special with these two guys. And then that rift, which wasn't just creative, but apparently it had to do with money, which again is the reason so many of these bands either broke up or had arguments. This wasn't just creative. It was, hey, this is mine and I'm keeping it to myself. The band would break up toward the end of the 80s after, another album with some great music on it, and songs that aren't heard on the radio really anymore, like Say You Will and I Don't Want to Live Without You, which ends up being yet another power ballad that does really well on adult contemporary stations. And every so often, you'll still hear it now. But that was kind of the end of that cycle. And Lou went his separate way. And then Mick decided to recruit a vocalist, which again, if you're thinking Kelly Hansen was the first time, it wasn't. Johnny Edwards joined Foreigner, and I think he would later sing in a reconstituted version of Bad Company for a little while. But Johnny Edwards did a great job on this album, Unusual Heat. The album hit the discount bin in like 2 weeks. I remember there were punching holes and drilling pieces out of the CD, and it wound up in this old days. They had the stand-up CD boxes before they got rid of all that packaging. And I remember seeing that album in there, probably one of the worst album covers in the history of album covers. Either Atlantic Records knew the thing was going to bark like a dog, or they just said, well, if it's successful, it won't be because of the album cover art, And the album itself is actually really, really good if you go and listen to it. And Johnny Edwards is a great singer. He's not Lou Gramm, but he's a great singer. Lou Gramm would go off and form this band called Shadow King, and they released just an amazing album. I think Vivian Campbell was on it. And, both albums got a little bit of rock radio airplay, but for 30 plus years, they've vanished from being heard on the radio. And both, by the way, are worth listening to. I'm just saying, if you like that style of music, there are a lot of similarities. I would say the Shadow King is a little more rockin', which again, sort of undergirds this idea that Lou wanted to rock out again. And eventually they would get back together again for one album in the 90s. And at that point, it was adult contemporary radio that played some of the stuff on the album, but it wasn't really a big success. But I think they both realized at that point that they needed each other, and that Foreigner, if it was going to continue, it had to be Mick Jones and Lou Gramm. But, there's been a lot of stuff said since Lou's brain surgery and since he recovered. And that's when they finally just ditched Lou altogether. And I can understand some of that. Lou was not singing all that well after the surgery. He was lucky to be alive, and I would have cut him a lot of slack. But again, these bands, they want to keep going. And so Kelly Hansen, from the band Hurricane, if you remember Hurricane, I'm On to You, he becomes the singer, and he's been the singer ever since. And he's pretty much running the show now. So it's a little ironic. I think Lou Gramm is in a position now to just say whatever he wants to say. He said stuff about how Foreigner's not going to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame because Mick blew it. Mick said something to somebody, and they're not even going to consider Foreigner, at least for now. But Lou, I think, is just spilling the beans on the disagreements and the fact that he got the shaft really on this amazing epic song that's heard hundreds of times a day all over the world and will be probably for eternity. And I think that's where the regret is there. It's like, okay, maybe I should have taken the 5%, maybe I should have negotiated. But when you're offered 5%, that probably makes you feel, really small. And it would be good to know like some of the arranging that went on, some of the ideas that were batted back and forth. And even if that was part of the creative process where these guys sat down and hashed this out, but most of it ended up being Mick Jones saying, yeah, my idea is better than your idea, right? And we're going to go with what I want to do. Even if that was happening, Mick Jones probably he should have been a nice guy and said, hey, all right, I can't do this without Lou. I'm going to give him 25%, and I think Lou would have agreed to that. Maybe, I don't know. You'd have to ask Lou Gramm, would be a good question. So what number would you have agreed on, Lou? 5 is ridiculous. We get that. And maybe too insulting. And at that point, you say, yeah, just obviously you think you did everything, so you just keep it. So kind of a sad thing to learn about. But it shows that the rift was more than just the musical direction of the band. It was, hey, we can't even agree on revenue sharing here, and you probably don't value what I do in this band, so I'm just going to hit the road, and that's what Lou Gramm did. And thankfully, though, these guys got back together and they did the new band and the old band thing a few years back, and it seemed to go pretty well. It was great to see Lou Gramm out there again. And you thought to yourself, maybe these guys put all this stuff behind them, but apparently not completely. And Lou's just telling it like it is. Good for him. All right, so that's the video on the topic. Yesterday, I did this video about how Foreigner's kind of on the edge of not having any original members, with Lou Gramm not there anymore for sure, and Mick Jones only showing up for part of a fairly long set, like a half hour or 25 minutes or whatever. And a lot of these bands, this is their future, unless they just say, hey, we're replacing everybody. We're going to let everybody know about it. And if you don't like it, tough, But some people, they're just not going to put up with that. Others understand and are more forgiving and more casual in their fandom. And I think that is really the dominant force out there, the casual fans. I hate to say it, being an old guy and knowing the old bands and knowing what they were like in those days, and now looking at things as being kind of a facsimile, and not at times not a reasonable facsimile, just like almost a cover band. It's sad, but this is what old school rock fans have to look forward to, unless they get into some new music, which I continue to promote on this channel. And I want to thank everybody for watching those videos that I put out there by bands like Cry. Yesterday, I had this guy, Brian Barnhouse, on, carrying the torch. It's a lonely thing to do these days, but hey, you know, I think more of us should get in there and promote some of the new stuff, so we don't have to just talk about our old bands that are slowly fading away. All right, done. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing, and I will see you soon.